Disney's Hollywood Studios has received a lot of changes in the last few years, including Toy Story Land, Galaxy's Edge. So it's good, right? Not exactly. Today on the podcast, it's all about ideas for ways to improve Disney's Hollywood Studios. Lots of cool ideas from you. I'm super excited to do this. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks for joining me here on episode 174 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. This episode will be a bit different than the typical interview shows. It's been really fun for me to do these armchair Imagineering shows, which have covered Epcot in the past. That was a 2-part episode. Then Tomorrowland at Disneyland and Dinoland USA at Disney's Animal Kingdom. This time we are going back to a full park, looking at Disney's Hollywood Studios. I have some of my own ideas and your ideas, audio submissions from past podcast guests. It's going to be so cool to dig through all this. It's interesting with this park because Disney has, like I mentioned in the intro, made updates. Galaxy's Edge was a huge expansion. And I think is very well themed, has one great attraction and one good attraction. Toy Story Land has a good roller coaster and a spinner, and they added an extra track to Toy Story Mania, so that got extra capacity. And of course, you have Tower of Terror and Rock and Roller Coaster on the other side, plus some good shows, nighttime entertainment, etc. However, we've really seen with Disney Genie Plus that while there's more attention and more people are going to the studios, that there is a gap because what you have happen more than any of the other parks is you have these headliners that are very popular. And even I would include in headliners attractions like Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, which was added recently, Toy Story Mania. All of the big ones, even Smuggler's Run, are very popular in terms of getting Genie Plus reservations for the Lightning Lane. But the issue there is then there's a big drop off. You have Star Tours kind of in the mid-tier attractions, and then you're looking at character greetings, even some of the shows that used to play like Little Mermaid aren't playing, and there's just not much else. So in general, the landscape is the park has more top-notch attractions that people want to do. However, it's not complete. And that's kind of the framework, I feel like, for what I'm going to be talking about here. There's some great things. This is not a chance to just take shots at a park that has come a long way. It's very different. I really enjoyed going to the Disney MGM Studios. When it opened in 89, we went that summer, and then the 90s. But it has changed significantly. For the good or not is a question that everyone has their own opinions. But in general, the park has evolved, but I feel like it's still kind of, maybe 2/3 of the way there is what I would say. And so it's one of those cases where I had a comment on Facebook from Andrew Spaziano. They desperately need more mid-tier attractions, is what he said. An expansion behind Sunset Boulevard is my best suggestion if that's feasible to even move whatever's backstage there. Animation Courtyard desperately needs some life as well. I'm going to dig into that more, but I wanted to present that. The key point there being they desperately need more mid-tier attractions. And it's tough for a corporation like Disney. We're also seeing this with changes they've made at Epcot and even at the Magic Kingdom, is they're all about kind of right now going for the home run. Like we've got to hit a home run and we've got to spend money that's connected to that. Where sometimes you need a lot of singles and doubles. And maybe those, you intend to make those that way and they end up being triples or homers. You've seen those where it doesn't seem like this is going to be as popular. And then with a lot of people, it becomes a lot more popular. And that's what you kind of have to do. You can't spend $300-400 million on every attraction. So to me, that's a big part of what I'm going to get into when I talk about my ideas in a moment. like I said, I have a lot of other cool ideas that I'm going to make sure I respond to. I'm going to start with mine, and I will also fill in a few comments from you as I'm talking it through, and then really finish with a lot of inventive, smart ideas that I think would make the park better. So let's get right to it. Here are my ideas and yours to improve Disney's Hollywood Studios. I want to start by talking about fan expectations and also value. And you might think, well, what does this have to do with improving the park? I promise I will get to it. We've seen a lot of changes from Disney, including, the addition of resort parking fees and pulling back certain elements that used to be perks. And there's always the connection to say, well, we're doing this because our competitors do this. The challenge with that is, okay, we're doing this, but you lose somewhat your differentiators. So you might look at this entire exercise and say, well, Dan, why are you choosing Hollywood Studios? This is a park where Disney has spent so much money and invested so much time in improving it. Don't you want to focus on other areas? Now, I did talk about Epcot first because that seems to be, but really, if I look at various parks and what they're doing, it makes a lot of sense. But I want to give this example. I have been a longtime fan of Bruce Springsteen. I would not claim to be a fan since I was really young, but I became a fan more during the reunion tour of the E Street Band and saw him live first on the Rising Tour. I believe this was in 2002, if I remember correctly. And so I had never seen him before. I had heard he was amazing and was just so blown away by that show and was like, oh my gosh, all the things I've heard are true. I am going to see Bruce every single time I can in St. Louis. I've also traveled to Chicago, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Kansas City to see him. Have seen him 9 times, which for Bruce fans I know is not that many, but for me is a lot, especially because tickets aren't that cheap and he doesn't often come here. So Bruce is currently going to tour for the first time since 2016 in 2023. And they've recently announced the tickets. And I went to purchase tickets in Kansas City, and I did not. Here's how we're going to circle back to Disney in a moment. But I will say that there's been a lot of press about the Ticketmaster dynamic pricing and how that's caused Bruce tickets to go to $5,000. Now, granted, those are never the ones I'm going to buy anyway. But I didn't buy them because in the past, Bruce, I think, undervalued himself purposefully in the market. So he could say that essentially he's providing a better value even than what he should. And he would charge $75 when his contemporaries were charging double that. And then bumped it to $80. And then even in 2016, the tickets, I think I paid a little over $100. And that's a lot for a concert, don't get me wrong, and not including fees and everything. But it always felt like a good value. And now this time, the average ticket price is like $260. The tickets I could have gotten for $80 or $90 are now $300, and I just couldn't do it. I'm not talking about the outliers, like the basic tickets. And I say this because I feel like Disney has kind of fallen into the same situation, where it seemed like for a while, the tickets and passes and even resorts and everything else, they were expensive, but I always felt like they were a good value, like even possibly, especially with tickets, possibly too low for what you got. But like Bruce, it was a case with a lot of people where that was part of what made you go, I paid a good amount, but I got even more than I expected. And that's where I think the expectations for Disney get so high, because you have a lot of people that went that first time to Disney World. I mean, you could say whatever time, 80s, 90s, even as recently as, 7, 8 years ago or something. And we're just so blown away by the experience because they paid a lot, but then it still exceeded that. And so what that does, though, is that lifts the expectations. And then when Disney pulls this stuff up to, in theory, according to like market forces, what they should be charging, the expectations are so much higher. And I do think we are seeing this with Disney Genie Plus, where people are having to pay for attractions and having to pay for that. And I know this is a little bit to the side of armchair Imagineering, but I do feel like it creates expectations that are even higher. that really are almost impossible for Disney to meet. So then you have situations where we look at parks and we go, okay, I'm paying for tickets. I am paying 1.5 times what I paid 3 years ago or something. And the parks, they've made updates, but they still seem to be not fully where they need to be, whether it's entertainment, attractions, etc. So while this is a fun, kind of goofy exercise to go through crazy ideas, there is that framework behind it where you say, the D23 Expo is coming up in September. I don't expect Disney's going to announce much from Disney's Hollywood Studios. This is a case where, they may announce something to replace the Little Mermaid show or, give updates on entertainment or whatnot, but I don't expect a major expansion. I understand they're probably going to focus on some other parks. But the fact that that's the case, you really look at the park and you say, okay, it's possible these issues in the park, like if they announce something at D23 right now, that is going to open, even a mid-tier attraction, you're talking probably 3 years if it hasn't started built. And that's best case, it could be longer, 2 to 3 years. So let's say if they don't announce anything this year, then maybe you have to go out further and maybe they don't even start building for a few years and they're not going to see anything for a while. Now, I may be too pessimistic about this. Maybe Disney is going to make some serious updates to the park. They recognize, they're seeing the surveys. They recognize there's a gap there. And if they do it, that's awesome. So I say all that to kind of lead into looking at the park on the whole. Because when I look at the park on the whole, my thought is like, there are near-term things they can do. And then there are long-term things they can do. I don't expect Disney to say, all right, we're bringing in another super headliner. It'll be open in 2 years. No, that's just not possible. I know with Epic Universe looming that all of Disney's parks, I think if I was in management, I would be scrutinizing and saying, financially, as reasonable as we can do it within reason to a point, but we need to look at all of our parks and make sure that they don't seem to be lacking. And because people are going to look at this new high-tech park with lands from IPs that people are very interested in, or just technologies we haven't seen, and going well beyond what you might have years ago expected from Universal is my expectation. And that's going to open in 3 years. Oh boy. So I think Disney, whatever they're doing, they better do it right now or start doing it or make decisions about it. So that's the way I look at it with my ideas, where I'm saying short term, what could they do in the next 6 months to a year? Then what can they do in 2 to 3 years? And then then some grander ideas that might be 5 years. But I think really the framework that they need to be working from with improving each park is in the next 4 years. Because you think about it, Epic Universe opens in 2025. Maybe Disney comes back at the 2024 Expo and they've been working something behind the scenes and they can have some other attractions. Because yes, we know Tron will eventually open. But we're looking at not being sure, and we will know a lot more in a little over a month from now. But still, I think they have to be careful. So I know we're starting off in a bit different way as kind of this is essentially kind of a silly exercise, but I do want to keep it grounded with my thoughts. I am trying to think of it in terms of, I'm not going to come in and say, let's bring everything back from 1989. Some people are going to bring up some ideas, and I have some ideas where I say there was an attraction from that time that I think could be modernized and brought back in some form and could still be awesome. I will talk about that. It's something that I've talked about before on this show. But in general, I'm trying to think of it in terms of, with the current landscape, with the focus on intellectual properties from Disney to a point, though I'm going to have a little fun. I'm not going to get too far into that zone. But with the kind of what they own and what they can do, what are some types of attractions and changes that Disney can make that will make this a more complete park in a lot of different ways? Not just, here are my 3 dream attractions that would be the coolest things ever. Let's bring back Great Movie Ride exactly the same way, et cetera, et cetera. More on that a little bit later. But in general, I'm going to look at it as, what are the types of attractions that will complete this park, will make it, like if I went there for a day, even given the current Disney Genie Plus Lightning Lane setup, how will that then deliver a great experience and deliver a great experience for different types of guests? Because I think about it in terms of our most recent trip. We had a good time at the studios, but my wife gets motion sickness. Erin even got motion sickness a little bit. She did considerably on Remy's. Be careful on that one at Epcot. But Mickey and Minnie's, she enjoyed it very much. Still a few spots, and even more. She's not going to go on Rock and Roller Coaster anymore. Tower of Terror. Slinky Dog is kind of, it's hit or miss. She's not going to go on Smuggler's Run or Rise of the Resistance, again, because Rise of the Resistance has some portions that could bother her, though I think she would have done okay. But still, Toy Story Mania she can do, and we're not going to do Alien Swords and Saucers or Star Tours. So now, granted, this is a pretty extreme case now of motion sickness, but it's, it's a case where you look at the park, and I'm not saying every change should just be about motion sickness, but what that does is that reveals kind of a limitation to what they essentially are offering. And we don't want that. We don't want a limitation. Disney's always thrived on having a wide range of attractions at its parks. And I'm not saying there's no variety at the studios. Even those attractions I just listed, you have more intense and then intensity that most people can handle. But I will say there is a gap in those classic type Disney attractions. And I know they're trying to compete with Universal, who continues to push the envelope. But you don't want to forget your core competencies and what you do so well. You want to mix it up where, yes, we're going to try have something like Rise of the Resistance is a good example that competes with Universal, but also has touches that we do really well when it's operating, of course. But even Galaxy's Edge, the land on the whole, there are things in there they do very well. But there are also elements of everything they've done recently which seems to miss certain aspects that are important. So without further explanation, let's dive into some thoughts I have about specific changes. So in the short term, I think the biggest change, we need to look at Galaxy's Edge, because I feel like Disney put the foundation in place for something really vibrant and exciting, but forgot to actually do the last step, which is to do that. I mean, you had, a case where you might see some Imperial people walking around, or Kylo, sometimes Rey and Chewbacca, but overall, the land sometimes feels way too static. Yes, you have the marketplace and the various dining establishments, which are great. Like I said, I like the two attractions, but I feel like the biggest thing they're missing is I'm not talking about your static character greetings. I'm talking about what they are sort of doing through the Galactic Star Cruiser, but doing this at Galaxy's Edge where it's a little less personal perhaps, but things are happening around the land. You have all these sets. Why not use them and build them up with entertainment? And there's a related note to this, but first of all, I want to talk about, they need to just it doesn't need to be every time it's the biggest characters you have. You can also just have people playing various rebels and Imperials, and they've done it to a small extent, or stormtroopers with your data pad and everything else. They should take that to the next level. Because if you think about something that could dramatically change what the park is like without a huge financial investment, I know you need to pay cast members, but still, compared to a new attraction or show, the ability to just add a lot more characters and people that are involved there, it's like kind of, again, you're not giving out missions and doing all the things they're doing at the Galactic Star Cruiser. You want to distinguish that. But in a sense, I feel like they took a lot of their ideas of what might happen at Galaxy's Edge and moved it to the Star Cruiser. Because, of course, people paying more, you have to make this seem different. However, Galaxy's Edge, again, like with the buildings and with the whole land, if you had a lot more going on there, it would change it. And I'm including Oga's in this and just the marketplace and everything else. There needs to be more going on, including music. Like, really, is it that hard? Like, you see it. We have that. I'm not talking about just like a performance. I'm talking about people roving the land, small bands playing. Just make it seem like a place that it's supposed to be this kind of marketplace where people actually are and live and everything else. And it doesn't feel that way. I mean, you see it where you watch like TV shows and everything else where they go to these vibrant Star Wars locations. I want it to feel like that. And granted, it's never going to feel exactly like that, but Disney would not have to do that much. You hire a small group of people have them switch out various characters, or even ones when they have to wear like heads to look alien or whatever. They could be playing different characters at different times. You don't set time schedules. You don't add a bunch of meet and greets. What you are doing is essentially having them just be around in the land. I mean, there's a lot of ways, like we've seen this, where you can use your phone, your data pad, and interact with various things in the land, whether it's lights, whatever. But there's a lot of cool details. Why not have people just being involved with that? And yes, they can come up with stories about what they're doing and everything else. And maybe they do involve people that are in the area. But there's a way to do it where it's not feeling just like the Galactic Star Cruiser. It's its own thing. And that leads me to the second big change there. They've already done this in Disneyland with the additions of Boba Fett and Fennec Shan, and ultimately Grogu will be there. They need to do this in Florida too. And I don't really think the argument that because the Galactic Star Cruiser's there, they have to stick in the timeline, I don't think it's legitimate. I really think the only difference is because in California, they feel like they need to do that in order to draw more locals. They don't feel like they need to as much in Florida, and I feel like they do. This is such an opportunity where you had Obi-Wan Kenobi with various characters going on, and you should have had some connection to it. You have the Mandalorian. I mean, obviously, just the slam dunk obvious idea. Mandalorian and Grogu should have a meet and greet. If you want to keep the launch bay and put it there to kind of sort of keep the timeline the way it is, sure, why not? I'd rather have them in Galaxy's Edge. Same with Boba Fett and Fennec Shan. They should also be there. You've got Ahsoka coming up. I mean, come on. An Ahsoka meet and greet? How cool would that be? I mean, it'd be amazing. Cass Andor with characters from that will be starting soon with the Andor show. So many opportunities with these TV shows. They've done it with Avengers Campus, and they're super popular. And you cannot underestimate the importance of Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and everything else, where basically you put those characters out there and the fans do the marketing for you. You don't have to do much. And that's the case where I think Disney is undervaluing the importance of that, where you have Star Wars fans that would go to the park and pay the high admission just to meet those characters. And yes, they want to go on a few attractions, but maybe they've already done the attractions. They would go back. If Ahsoka was there, you would see people going just for her. I think Disney needs to it's fine if you want to make, like Rise of the Resistance takes place at a certain point. Great. Smuggler's Run takes place at a certain point. Okay. But people, most of us, and I'm talking like 99% of visitors who go to these parks don't care about the time frame. I am someone who has a lot of strong views about the parks. I don't care about this. I really don't. And because I think you weigh it together, loss of thematic consistency with the time, or getting to meet all these great characters that we enjoy in the show. I think there's really no competition here. And it doesn't mean that it's not like you don't have to do a dance party with Darth Vader dancing. You don't have to have the characters not act true to themselves. The characters can still be true to themselves and their story. But the timing varies for Batuu. Okay, when they're there, they're coming from a certain time and a different story. It's not that hard. Beyond just Galaxy's Edge, I feel like the park in general, this is a park which is about the movies and TV and stories, and entertainment should be a key part of it. So now I know an easy choice, you could say, was to bring back Streetmosphere. I don't have an issue with that being a solution. I'm not going to really propose that because I feel like the park has kind of moved away a bit from that focus on old Hollywood. Yes, the sets are that way. And I know I'm going to contradict myself a little bit with an option I offer in a bit. But I do feel like overall, the park needs to focus more on its entertainment. And I don't just mean shows. I mean walk around characters. I mean everything they are doing. And be like, hey, we have the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular. Can we meet Indiana Jones? Is that crazy? It seems silly if you do, like, why is that a big deal? But we need things you can do. In Toy Story Land, what are new ways we can do this beyond just having a few meet and greets and a few characters? This is a land dedicated to a film that people really enjoy, a set of films that people really enjoy. Can there be another way to have things happening in the land. I remember when the Green Army Men would march through Pixar Place when it was that way, and how much fun that was. Just find a few new characters from Toy Story and bring them out. Just look for, in general, short-term thinking, Disney. And a short-term thinking implies like you're not thinking about the future. That's not exactly what I mean. What I mean is quicker changes you can do. Another thing, too, is I think Disney needs to give a fresh look to One Man's Dream / Walt Disney Presents. The Walt Disney section, keep it the same. But I would like to see something a little better for that area than just meet and greets and previews of the latest movies. I feel like you could really have some special events, really cool fit parts of it, especially when you have that movie theater that isn't just about, okay, if you're going to promote your new film, give us some behind the scenes info we didn't expect. Give us something more. If you have a TV series that's on Disney Plus right now, what can I do to give us something that's exclusive to the park? And that's with that back area, easily fixable. I mean, fixable sounds weird, but easily updated. The One Man's Dream, Walt Disney Presents. The first half I want Walt Disney's story there. I would love if it was the whole thing, honestly. But I'm trying to think again in terms of Disney, the way that Disney is approaching it. And that's another easy change that you could make. So that's like a few quick changes. Focus on Galaxy's Edge, do that. Next is we're talking like in a year or two or possibly less, but a slightly longer time period. All right, let's look at capacity of the park. We have the Voyage of Little Mermaid Theater. It is not currently operating. It probably won't operate again. What can we put there in a reasonable time that it's likely going to be a show? But again, you could also do something like a fairly simple dark ride or something else there. But we need that capacity. We need it as soon as possible. You cannot underestimate how many people, even who didn't love it, would go to that Little Mermaid show. Heck, if you want to do something grander or something more significant, just decide to put the show back in for a year. Or say, bring it back for 6 months. Say temporary, last chance to see it, and do that. That's another change that I'm thinking in terms of what are things the park can do short term that immediately help the park to get over this current situation. Long term is where you make the bigger changes, but short term, look at all the shows you're providing. Make sure they're operating, and then 2, make sure, Indiana Jones Epic Stunt Spectacular, do a nighttime show. I know it costs a lot, but if the park's open till 9, the last show should not be 4:30. That's just something you have to do right there. I know this is going to cost more, but you need, even if they're playing to half full crowds, again, Frozen sing-along, last show is at 6:30. You're putting a 7:30 show in there if the park is open late enough. Everything you can do that is a smaller Disney Junior. Currently, I'm looking at today. So again, this is just one day. Last show is 4:55. Add 2 more shows. Everything you're doing, I know, is going to cost you more. Beauty and the Beast. Right now, 11, 1, 2, 4, and 5. Add another show. Whether you want, 10's probably too soon. Put a show at noon or put a show at 6. This is not about logistics with this, but we're assuming, again, parks close at 9. We need to give people more things to do. And some of these changes actually could be done sooner, I would believe. But we are going to add more shows. And anything that is still on we'll bring back that sometime, but we haven't. Like if I look right now at the website, there's, Meet the Toys and Toy Story Land returning soon. Green Army Drum Corps returning soon. Anything that says returning soon, COVID's not really going anywhere, but the parks are getting enough people where you've got to ramp that up. And Fantasmic says returning this year. You need to bring back Fantasmic as soon as possible and run it every single night. Every night, Disney. These are all changes in the shorter period of time. Now, you might say, Dan, these are kind of obvious ideas. But again, this is more down-to-earth ideas. Now, as we look ahead, it gets more complicated. this is a good time to read a comment from Brian Fisher on Facebook, where this is what he said. I think the biggest issue that faces DHS is the lack of coherent theming. This is something that is plaguing all the parks, but since the removal of the studio aspect of the park, it just seems kind of a hodgepodge. The theming and storytelling is something that was always in Disney's wheelhouse, and they seem to have been out to sea on it lately and compensating for it by writing and publishing backstories, but not really tying everything together in a coherent and thoughtful way. So this is where you start to think about issues like this. When you get beyond the near term, we need to fix our capacity issues as quickly as possible. Now you get to what's the future of the park. I am not going to suggest for me that you change the name of the park. By now, people understand that Disney's Hollywood Studios is not actually a working studio. You also have Universal Studios, which does do some production, but not much in Florida at all. So both of them, you kind of have the idea. If you call it something studios, it just means it's themed. I think the chance to change it to Disney's Hollywood Adventure or something like that, the benefits of that probably balance. Like they're not as high as you think because people have gotten used to DHS and the studios and Disney Hollywood Studios and everything else. The name would take a lot. And I'm not sure it's really worth doing at this point for me personally. But I can see if you wanted to make a more dramatic change to the park, whether it's just to even further gut the idea of old Hollywood, like if you were going to, I hate to even put this in the universe, if you're going to retheme Tower of Terror and sort of retheme some of the Sunset Boulevard, Hollywood Boulevard shops from the outside and everything, then maybe you could change it. But if you're going to leave a lot of that and also just leave that look, then I feel like it makes sense to just leave this overall and focus on people know this park. They know what it's called. We don't really need to change it. That's the way that I look at it overall. With that said, I do feel like the park needs to have a better sense of where like individual lands and areas. And this is where the first bigger changes come for me. And this is where I talked about earlier, the focus on old Hollywood. I feel like we need to carve out a part of this that focuses more on Hollywood and everything else. So as we go down Sunset Boulevard, see, I feel like Beauty and the Beast live on stage, not my favorite, but we're going to leave it for now because I feel like people do enjoy it. Beauty and the Beast did have the live action movie fairly recently. And also this idea of kind of the big Hollywood show, Broadway type show, it's not really Hollywood, more Broadway type show, but I'm okay with this kind of connecting to it. Tower of Terror is not being touched. I feel like the only change I might make is to vary up some effects, try to spruce it up a little bit, but nothing significant with the overall theme and what's being done. I feel like they do a good job with that, and we're going to leave it. We're going to keep it basically the way it is. You also have Fantasmic over there. Again, sort of still fits, I feel like, because you have the focus on the past Disney films. This whole area, though, is overall, the idea of it is this is the old Hollywood, classic Hollywood is probably a better term, area. So where this is really going to be the changes is in the other side. So you walk forward down Sunset Boulevard and you have Tower of Terror. That's going to stay. The two shows will stay. Turn left, Rock and Roller Coaster with Aerosmith. I am not removing the roller coaster. I feel like having an indoor roller coaster that's thrilling, that has a launch, that people still enjoy it's been there a long time, for more than 20 years, people still enjoy is valuable. However, I don't want to pick another band because I feel like no matter what band you pick, you're going to run into a similar situation that people are kind of talking about with Aerosmith, where it's like, you want a band with a large cross-section. We're seeing this issue with the Super Bowl, though. I really enjoyed this year's Super Bowl halftime show, I have to say. But in general, you see this when they try to bring in a band that fits everyone. And it's like, we have Coldplay or Maroon 5 being a much worse example because they're a worse band. And everyone's like, well, that's fine, I guess. But it's hard to find artists or bands that can fit so many different people. Aerosmith worked out okay at the time because they did have a resurgence in the 90s and we're still kind of, with MTV and everything else, we're still kind of present when it opened. By now, I think people enjoy the attraction, but I don't get the impression that everyone is like, man, I go there just for the Aerosmith. Nothing against Aerosmith, but I don't think that's true. But I think if you add a new artist, whether it's new or classic rock or any type of music, you're going to run into a similar situation. And of course, you could say, well, Dan, what about Marvel? Well, the challenge here has to do with if there was absolutely no restrictions from the Universal contract, you could look at it and say, okay, this is a perfect spot. I mean, it doesn't fit thematically with Tower of Terror, and unfortunately, I think that might be the only saving grace that they don't make that Mission Breakout. But you have a situation where this would be a fitting spot for a Marvel land, as we saw in Paris. However, what I've seen so far as the Paris attraction with the Avengers, it looks pretty shaky. I mean, there's again, you can't really do justice to what you're experiencing on a YouTube video, but it looks like you got some screens, you got some effects, it's like, really? The Iron Man animatronic is good. Skipper Ben on Marty Called recently compared him to the animatronic in the queue of Justice League Battle for Metropolis, the Cyclops animatronic. And that seems about right. So I don't want to get Disney to feel too proud of that. I appreciate they even had an animatronic in the queue. But overall, I feel like if you found a way to either they did not have the restrictions with Universal and everything else, Rock and Roller Coaster, I thought Rock and Roller Coaster was a much better fit for Guardians of the Galaxy than putting them in Epcot. But from what I've heard, Cosmic Reround is really cool. But in general, I'm going to just not pick Marvel there, though I understand that roller coaster, that is another option. Instead, we're going to theme this and Lightning McQueen, easiest decision ever. That thing's done. We will wait until some of the other changes I implemented would come into place so people have capacity. But back in this corner, no. Here's what we're going to do. First of all, I'm going to look at Lightning McQueen. This is where I believe you can create an attraction. It's not the great movie ride, but an attraction that pays tribute to movies. And I'm going to stick with Disney films, live action, some animated, but mostly live action films that Disney has created. And you have a trackless dark ride. Now, I know I talked about spending money, but this is not Rise of the Resistance. This is not a 20-minute experience, but we're going to say like 8 minutes. So, longer than Disney has been doing, but not insane. What the premise of this attraction, which this is probably the most I'm going to spend anywhere in terms of big changes, but I love this idea. The idea of Cinemagique, where Martin Short was pulled into a film, and there's some clever things with getting in and out of films. But for us, I like the idea of somehow, I think a time machine is always helpful, but somehow we are pulled into films. So this is not a case where we are fans who are going by and saying, there's Humphrey Bogart and there's Ingrid Bergman and Tarzan and everything else. No, we are pulled into this world, kind of like in the Wizard of Oz scene, a great movie ride, where we actually feel like we're in there. This goes that way. I like trackless just because, again, you can bring people into different parts of the story and different views. So what are the films then that we are going to do? Because again, this is not going to be every Disney film ever. We're going to zone in on some of the most popular films Disney's ever done. But also clarify, this is going to mostly be physical sets, animatronics. Screens will be used in the background to expand what we are seeing. I think that's the best way screens can be used in attractions. So again, the films we are going to focus on, a big one is Mary Poppins. And I feel like this is still a classic, super important film in the history of the Disney company. Some of the biggest films that Disney ever had, you of course had Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, probably the most important film in the history of Disney. When you get past that, other ones that are important, a really good example is Mary Poppins. It was so popular. It really invigorated. Disney had been making more kind of second tier in general. I hate to say second tier, but they were making tons of money on their live action films, but very few were on the level of success that was had by Mary Poppins. So that's one where I feel like you could really do something fun with the latest. I mean, you could have a few animatronics, but then that's where the screens could help with something like Step in Time or Chim Chimney or something like that. But because this was something that was in Great Movie Ride, Mary Poppins. I always was a little disappointed by what was put in there because it was early on, it happened super quick, and you almost weren't even ready for it, and bam, there it is. So that's one that we will definitely focus on. Another no-brainer, I know there's Johnny Depp, in the news and everything, but still, I feel like the film is bigger than that, is the Pirates of the Caribbean series, the live-action series that so many people have enjoyed. And I feel like it's not, again, you could say, well, there's already Pirates of the Caribbean rides, but there's a way to put us in there and do a few scenes that would not be the exact same thing and would not interfere too much with this park versus the other park. But I can see that as an issue, and if that's too big of an issue for you, I totally get it. Another one is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Granted, there are things you can do with effects right now to make it feel like we are under the sea, and you have a room that's basically us in the Nautilus, and then the squid comes, and a lot of that could be done with screens with the squid and everything, but you'd have a Captain Nemo and other characters. This is another one that has become, that's just so popular that I feel like is a no-brainer to put that as a scene. So you have essentially, we're trapped in Mary Poppins, we are trapped in Pirates of the Caribbean, we are trapped in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. These are all the most obvious. And I'm not bringing in the live-action versions of the animated films. I feel like that's totally separate, and we don't need to focus on that. So then you go, okay, Dan, you've hit those three big ones. What else? Another one is Tron. Because again, I feel like this is tailored. Tron is almost made better for theme parks. And we already are going to have Tron at, again, a Tron attraction there. But you're inside the film. And I'm not trying to just make this greatest hits of the other parks. I feel like there's still a way to put you in the film where you could do that. Another thing we could do, especially with the new show coming, and is kind of pay tribute to Disney MGM Studios, a past attraction, the playground, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and then also Honey, I Shrunk the Audience. And we could have, let's bring in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. It was also one of Disney's most popular films. Put that one in there. Another one, which I feel like connects really well to old Hollywood, is the Rocketeer. That is also one that is much more popular than maybe its box office shows. So right there we have the makings of a really classic attraction where you're trying to get out and you're various, you end up in these, and you try to have something from each genre and go back through. Tron kind of fits the sci-fi aspect, but there's plenty of other options that you could do if you don't want to connect to other attractions, so many more, but this is what this is going to be. This is the biggest expense, but I feel like there is a way to do it where it still costs a lot. But Disney has learned enough from doing like super high end, like Rise of the Resistance and everything else, that I feel like there has to be a way. I say this in general. There has to be a way to create attractions that don't break the bank every single time. Now, I know the Lightning McQueen building may not be big enough. So this is something where that would likely be the queue area, similar to how Guardians works. And this is not going to have to be a super tall building. This is also something where it's trackless and it may spin around or whatever, but there's no motion simulation to any of this. It's still mostly you're moving through slowly and things are happening around you. And yes, there are screens and things happening, but this is not a case where the screens are going to be used to make you feel like you're moving. We have plenty of other attractions like that. So that's done. The next thing, this is where it gets a little trickier with Rock and Roller Coaster. I think what you could do here is retheme the sets inside the attraction to Hollywood 40s and 50s. And essentially what you are doing is you are racing to the latest premiere. You could pick a famous movie from Disney or just a generic Hollywood premiere, but you are hopping on these fancy cars and you're racing to get there so you can get there in time. Maybe you're the star. Maybe you're just someone who wants to get to the red carpet. There's a lot of different things you could do. But I feel like if done really well, you could create this amazing kind of ode to old Hollywood. Yes, the guitar doesn't really fit, so you probably have to lose that. And I do like that guitar. But you have something that feels very classic. You have the Disney films right next to you. And even if you want to connect it to getting to the red carpet for a famous Disney film, then I'm fine with that. But the biggest thing is just creating that feeling. This whole section is kind of my ode, in a sense, to the Disney MGM Studios. Now, I don't think Disney's going to do this, but I don't feel like this is so outlandish where if they were willing to adjust their thinking a little bit and allow for not everything being just a straight up, this is themed to this film, that they could do a lot of cool things here. I want to shift gears fairly soon to your input here. But I'm going to talk about what I think is the most important logistical change that Disney needs to do. The logistical change that needs to do is there needs to be a way to connect. This area back here, what I'm calling classic Hollywood, needs to connect. The park cannot have this giant dead end over here by Tower of Terror. So here's what I'm thinking. The pathway that you have right over there by Rock and Roller Coaster. Now, I'm looking again at a map that just has a bunch of grass. I'm not doing bioreconstruct here, so maybe there's another pathway or how it goes through. But I'm assuming there are buildings there, but there probably are. But maybe it's a pathway by the food system. I don't care. In my world, the pathway in front of like where you're about to go in under Rock and Roller Coaster, there's a left turn there. There's a new path. And that path is going to lead you over by where Star Wars Launch Bay is. It's it's not a huge path. But what that does is that connects in another way. That's one thing. The second thing, too, is then over by Launch Bay, you have another path that takes you over into Toy Story Land. Because Toy Story Land right now has 2 entrances, but and this path may connect right before, where technically it still only has 2 entrances, but this park has way too many dead ends. That needs to change. So we're essentially creating another path that winds over to Toy Story Land. So then you have a situation where Galaxy's Edge is its own thing. I'm not trying to dramatically shift that. You can get in there, but then you have the 2 exits there. But the biggest thing is Sunset Boulevard. You need a way to get from Sunset Boulevard back to the middle of the park without turning around. And then you need a way by Launch Bay again to cut around where you're again not turning around and going back. Because what we don't want is all of a sudden all these people from Sunset Boulevard walk over and they're by Launch Bay, and it's the same issue. So that is something we need to do logistically that is super important for this park. Circling back to Galaxy's Edge, this land, now that we're looking even a little further ahead, so now I'm venturing out to more like in 5 years. Galaxy's Edge needs a third attraction, and they need a third attraction that anyone can do. This is what they are missing. This is something that, like again, the foundation is in place. And I know we've heard about the Bantha attraction. I'm not going to use that exact attraction. Instead, I'm going to create an attraction that involves a transportation system. I know it's a little People Mover-esque, but I still feel like this is important. And there's a transportation system that allows you to go. It's actually, you're not actually able to get off, but it's presented like the transportation system within Galaxy's Edge. The entrance to it is going to be closer to where you come into Galaxy's Edge. I know you come in, you turn left, you're at Rise of the Resistance on the main entrance, not the Toy Story entrance. You turn right, there is going to be the station for this attraction. And what it essentially is doing, it's going to have a few indoor areas, essentially the beginning where you're at basically like a mechanic shop or droid depot or whatever you want to call it. And basically right there, you are going to board this, and it's going to go through some trees and then also bring you kind of around Galaxy's Edge. And it's going to take some cleverness to make this not jarring or to mess with sight lines. A lot of it's going to have to go behind where we are right now. And I know we're pretty close to the road there, so there has to be some trees and other things. This is essentially a slow-moving attraction that gives you different views of the park. It also has its own story, but we don't need to overthink that too much. In general, there's no something goes horribly wrong. This is as close to the People Mover as it can be, but I think it's super important to have a third attraction. You really focus in on the pre-show and then on, narration or however you want to present it. You could have something where you're part of the resistance and you're doing reconnaissance or something. Maybe mix it up where it's not always the same every time. But I feel like Galaxy's Edge needs a third attraction. This park in general needs more rides. And I haven't really, so far I've only added one ride, which was a replacement for the show. So technically it probably doesn't add that much capacity, though it obviously adds interest. Because the number of rides in this park is way too low. Starting with 9, I've added that 10th ride, which was the classic movies, getting stuck in the movies ride. That gets us to 10. We've still got a long way to go. This attraction at Galaxy's Edge gets us to 11. We need more. And the area where we need it is Star Wars Launch Bay. I feel like that is an underused area. I want to keep everything with Star Wars, mostly. I want to keep everything beyond Star Tours focused on that side of the park. So we're going to use this, and this is going to be, again, replaced by another dark ride. And what we are going to do here is this area has Disney Junior. We have some sort of show. This is another area that's designed for everyone, not a thrill ride area, and relates to Disney's animated films. So you'd say, well, Dan, why are you putting that there? Well, we're not really in that section that far off from Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. If you look, we have Mickey and Minnie's in the middle. If you veer off to the right there, again, you're focusing on Disney's animated films and TV shows. So we are adding a dark ride here. Now, this is going to be a C-ticket dark ride, but, it's a boat ride. Disney does not have any boat rides at all. So I'm not even going to go into what film it's themed to or films, but this is going to be a boat ride themed towards Disney's animated films. There are a lot of different ways that could be taken. We already have a Little Mermaid ride. We don't need that. But I would love to hear your thoughts on what this could be. But I think Launch Bay, that area is big enough. You gut the inside. You put in a dark ride. A boat ride, which I know is not cheap, but we need it. Boat ride going there. That is ride number 12. Number 13, we are doing another water ride. This time, looking more towards the future. We are going to put a water ride. See Toy Story Land there? We're going to expand that. Now, you could do it multiple ways. You could say we're going to expand it with Toy Story more, or you have some sort of offshoot with something else from Pixar. But this is going to be something that gets you wet. Now, we're going to try and make it more inventive, not your typical just spinning raft or shoot the chutes. But it is going to be, I love log flumes. It doesn't have to be a log flume, but it's going to be kind of a hybrid attraction that mostly moves slow, but you do get wet because Florida, it's hot. Toy Story Land has no shade. It seems to make sense to put a water ride there. That is another thing that is missed. One other change I want to see happen. Star Tours, I would love to somehow, I don't know how you do this because the map doesn't really work here. But is there any way, and maybe this connects to my transportation attraction, where instead of exiting through the gift shop there, Star Tours at least gives you a possibility. Maybe you can choose, but you can either exit back through to your party, or there's another exit, or you come out on the path and it says this way to Galaxy's Edge, and there's a path around the back. Maybe you have to take out Mama Melrose's, and that becomes something else that themes to Galaxy's Edge. But I would love for there to be a way where Star Tours, no matter what, you end at Batuu. Like, essentially, you're going to all these planets, but your ultimate goal is to get to the Black Spire Outpost at Batuu. So that's the other thing is, I'm not one of those people that thinks Star Tours has to connect to Galaxy's Edge or should be removed, but I kind of like the fun idea of maybe connecting Star Tours in some way to Galaxy's Edge. Now, it would work better if that building did not have Muppet Vision and everything between, but I'm going to leave Muppet Vision the way it is, because I feel like there is a value to that too. My primary goals, there can be variations, whether or not you think we need to have that water ride by Toy Story Land, or if you want to have it somewhere over by Muppet Vision, or wherever. The main idea here is Hollywood Studios needs more attractions. So with adding the water ride for Toy Story Land, adding the ride at Galaxy's Edge, replacing Lightning McQueen with a ride, and adding the Launch Bay ride, you go from 9 rides to 13. 13 seems a little low, but I think we're heading in the right direction. I may even be overshooting with the complexity. You may even just want to add something not generic, not a spinner, but something pretty straightforward as a 14th ride that would be cheaper and could be added quickly, possibly near Disney Junior. Maybe there's something you could do there. But overall, this park needs more rides. Second, needs more entertainment. That was another big goal. Third, we need the logistics to line up better with the paths so you don't have as many dead ends. That was my third thing. Fourth, we need more indoor attractions at this park. I mean, there are indoor attractions, but it's just getting so hot where water rides and indoor attractions, one of the water rides is indoors, the other one is not, but you get the idea. We are trying to essentially carve out different sections. So like I said, I'm carving out Old Hollywood, I'm improving Galaxy's Edge, and I'm kind of connecting where Launch Bay is, Launch Bay, Disney Junior, Mickey and Minnie's, and the replacement for Little Mermaid are all connecting there in that own quadrant there. Yes, there's more you could do with Indiana Jones. And one other change I have here, and I've talked about it earlier, is we're going to bring back a variation on Superstar Television. This one could come soon, late, depending on what you do. Will require some shooting, but it's going to involve the latest shows and films of Disney. We're not just going to do your typical ABC. It's mostly going to be focused on Disney Plus. And whichever Marvel you can do, I'm not sure about that, but you could probably do a few of them. And then you're going to focus on The Mandalorian, everything involving Star Wars, everything. Maybe you could bring in, if it's popular enough, The National Treasure, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids TV series that might be coming back. But what you are doing is creating a show with audience participation using the latest technology. Superstar Television, you never did it, involved you to kind of stand in front of like a screen. It seemed like you were on Home Improvement or various other shows. They're going to do this, but with the latest shows possible. Another audience participation setup that is super important to allow you to have, one, to participate, but two, it's promotional, it's marketing, it's important for the Chapek ideas, but it also is super fun, and it's a different type of experience that everyone can do. I was once on the Cheer bar patron number 4, but I found that to be very fun, and I think that show idea is also missing in this park, which had really good audience participation shows, especially Superstar Television, the Monster Sound Show. So it again pays tribute to what has come before. I don't really know what land this technically would end up in, but this kind of stands on its own as a show that people should enjoy and I think would enjoy. Connects back to Disney MGM Studios, but it's not just a retread. It's something that would be really special and I think would also allow for a lot of fun experiences. Again, I'm thinking more of, in a world where we're all able to, even more than now, interact comfortably. That would be something that would be very fun. So I'd love to hear what you think of this, because now I'm going to dive into a bunch of ideas from you that I think are better than mine. I tried not to there were some that I had thought about, but I didn't really want to use exactly. So I tried to vary that a bit, but there's just a lot of great ideas that I can't wait to dive into. This is basically the second half of this episode. I hope you've enjoyed this so far. Send me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. Send me a message on Twitter, Facebook, wherever. Twitter is TomorrowSOC. Let me know what you think of my ideas. Most importantly for me, let's get into your ideas. So I'm going to start out by giving myself a break. I know you're tired of hearing from me. It's been about an hour. Let's go to Ryan Ritchie. He is the host of the Theme Park Trivia Show, which is a super fun YouTube show that you should check out with all theme park trivia. I was a guest on one episode where I competed against Tim Grassi, and Ryan does an awesome job, and I like his idea. So here it is. So take it away, Ryan.
Hey everyone, it's Ryan Ritchie from the Theme Park Trivia Show. And of course, one of the things I miss most about Hollywood Studios, or MGM Studios as it was known, is of course the studios. But I have an attraction idea that I think could lean into the current focus on everything Star Wars and give us a little bit of that old studios magic as well. So here's my pitch. What if you took the Star Wars launch bay and that became a behind-the-scenes presentation about the Star Wars shows on Disney Plus? So there's some great synergy to sell Disney Plus. Disney always loves that. And after you go by the usual props and costumes and that sort of thing, the big finale would be a reconstruction of the volume. Now, the volume is a series, it's a curved LED screen and overhead LED panels, which is how a lot of the show is shot. A lot of the Star Wars shows are shot in what's known as the volume. So what if you do this tour and at the end, there is a volume, and lo and behold, you can go in front of it and interact with some costumed characters from the Star Wars universe briefly and get your own little video of you in the Star Wars universe delivered just like PhotoPass into your account to cherish for years to come. So that's just one idea to sort of add something different, bring back a little bit of that nostalgic feel, but also in keeping with where it seems like Studios is headed. Other than that, maybe just get rid of the Studios name altogether, call it Disney's Hollywood Adventure, which I think may have been rumored at one time, and call it a day. But anything we could do to get back a little bit of that Studios magic would be great.
Thanks, Ryan. I really like that idea because I feel like it works on multiple fronts. One, it kind of recalls they used to have this even at like Six Flags, the put yourself in the music videos, or, they had it at Universal where it was like a live show where you appeared, and there were a lot of examples, and then they would sell you the video cassette or something. So this kind of fits with that, but this is similar, I think, a little bit to my idea on Superstar Television, which is connect us through newer technology, like Ryan describes, with the shows we really enjoy. And also, it's promotion for Disney. It's a way to get people excited that are fans that are able to, in quotes, live their Star Wars experience, or whichever one you use there. And you get to have character greetings, but it's not done in a boring kind of static way. There's an extra element to it. I like this, and I think this kind of fits with the idea of use the word immersive, which is really overdone, but in a way that isn't just the typical sit in a ride and maybe, they put a screen around you and you stare at it and you feel like it's simulated. That's not really immersive to me. That's actually sometimes a little nauseating. There's other ways to do that, and I feel like this is a great way. And of course, then Ryan brought up the name change, which I think is something a lot of people have thought about it, that it doesn't really fit, like I talked about earlier in the show. I don't have an issue with changing the name. I also just am not sure that if we called it Disney's Hollywood Adventure and just did the same things, does it really matter? I guess that's the way I look at it. But I don't have a problem with the idea, and Ryan came up with a cool one that I hadn't really considered as much, but I was thinking about kind of in a different way. All right, next up, I have an audio recording submitted by Carly Wiesel of the Very Amusing Podcast. She also writes a lot of great material for a wide range of publications, and always really appreciate Carly's work. She's been on the podcast several times, and her idea is pretty different than what everyone else, with a little one exception we'll hear later, is talking about. And that relates to the dining establishments at Disney's Hollywood Studios. Here are Carly's ideas.
Hi, Dan. This is Carly Wiesel, and obviously I would love any opportunity to yell my opinions about Walt Disney World Resort. But since we were talking about Disney's Hollywood Studios, I'm sure other people are hitting the main things, specifically how lately with Lightning Lane, the rides at that park just go so quickly. They need more, even though they've built so much already in recent years. They just need more. But I'm going to focus on something more granular, something very small, something that is nitpicky, that I don't know if other people are going to be thinking about. We need a re-themed quick service restaurant on the front end of this park. They have sunk so much money into new attractions at this theme park, brand new lands, and yet you will be walking through sections of it and feel like it's 1997 all over again. Right now, between ABC Commissary and Backlot Express, it just reinforces that old, dated vibe. And really, what are those themes in the park that this place is becoming? This is Disney of 2022. We need one of these places to be themed to a movie, to a studio, and not a commissary at a studio. I mean, what does that place promote besides like the Goldbergs in the final season of Blackish? You know what I mean? Like, there's not much happening there beyond the advertisements in the window. And if this is the modern version of the Walt Disney Company, the modern version of Walt Disney World as we're seeing it, one of these eateries eateries needs to be tied to IP. I think they really need to theme one of those to drive home a product of theirs, to drive home one of their studios, to drive home one of their films. I think it would be much better, it would balance out the park better, and would give people something to do that's more fun than Backlot Express. You know what I mean? I don't have any specific ideas, but I think changing one, if not both of those, updating them with some sort of more robust theme tied to a property within the company is inevitable and also needed at this point, because you can just breeze on by those and never think about them. And I don't think that's something that a Disney park in our current time can really have. I hope that's helpful, and I can't wait to hear the whole episode. Thanks so much for inviting me on.
I like this because I do feel like as we look at the theme of the park and the way the lands are set up and everything else, it's easy to look at attractions, rides and shows. How is everything put together, or even just the buildings around? But the dining does make a difference. We've seen Disney do a really good job, I think, with some of their new eateries, whether it's in Pandora or even at Galaxy's Edge with Docking Bay 7, Ronto Roasters, some of those. So there's always more they can do. Like, we actually ate at ABC Commissary on our last trip. It was good. I thought the food was much better than I expected. Now, granted, we mobile ordered and stood outside, so we weren't really experiencing the theme. But I agree, especially with Backlot Express, or even with both of them, where you look at it and you say, they're fine for what they do, allow you to get quick meals, somewhat of a variety of foods, and not spend as much time or money as some of the other restaurants. However, you can do that with better theming. Now, granted, it's going to depend on maybe other changes Disney makes to those areas. But in particular with Backlot Express, ABC Commissary seems to kind of be in its own area. You can walk by, it's near the front of the park. Whereas Backlot Express is near multiple big attractions. I mean, you have Star Tours right there. You're not that far from Muppets. There's a lot you could do there. I do also like the idea of Disney focusing more on the theming of the restaurants, because that is something that, when done well, can really upgrade the area and make for another thing for people to do beyond attractions. I don't want them to do that instead of attractions, but in addition, there are changes in the Hollywood Studios that would make it a stronger park, especially with its counter service eateries, where even with the additions in Galaxy's Edge, could still be upgraded more. I know the menus have gotten better, but I think there's still more they can do. So I think Carly's ideas are spot on. So now I'm going to do something different and read you a submission. And this is from Jeff Ferentz, who is Pepper's Ghost on Twitter, at Pepper's Ghost 0. And Jeff has several ideas that I think are very cool, and I want to dig through each one. So I'm going to read the whole thing, but then I will talk about each one as much as I can. Here's Jeff. I love this question because I think about it often. Hollywood Studios is a mess of a park and really could use a nice tidying up, and I recommend shifting towards theming the sections properly. First, I would keep Toy Story Land and Batuu as is. I won't get into the Star Cruiser too much, but if I was in charge, I would start thinking about an exit strategy and pivot to a Toy Story or Pixar-themed hotel. The animation courtyard down to Pixar Place needs a complete overhaul and has become part of the scenery instead of a place to stop and enjoy. I would love to see this area transformed into a new Walt Disney Animation history-type land. Now, this may sound boring at first, but this would be a great area to house all the classic characters and have themed attractions based on them. How about a Donald Duck dark ride where he travels through the history of the early cartoons into the modern ones? Perhaps a Steamboat Willie-themed restaurant. This area would now make sense if you add in the Runaway Railway attraction. What about a Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln? But this time it's Great Moments with Walt Disney. Full Walt animatronic with all his voice clips from over the years. Did I go too far with that one? May even suggest adding a Simpsons Springfield. Rumor has it the deal with Universal ends in 2028. Going to see these characters in the parks at some point makes the most sense in Hollywood Studios. Next up, this might be polarizing, but I would move Star Tours to Tomorrowland at Magic Kingdom and make that area one big Muppet Studios area. How about a dinner stage show featuring the Muppets? This isn't totally my idea, but maybe a smaller version of the Great Movie Ride, but this time it stars the Muppets. The Great Muppet Movie Ride? We'll get back to that in a minute, too. All right, real quick. I'm going to cover some of these in more detail. Interesting what he says about the Star Cruiser. I want to mention that briefly. I know that's not the primary focus. I know that it maybe isn't getting the same amount of sellouts or interest as it did up front, but I hadn't heard that it was being like in that bad a shape where they wanted to get out of it. Now, I wonder if Toy Story or Pixar would, I guess as a hotel, I think it would possibly work. But again, I don't know. If they really can't do this Galactic Star Cruiser justice, you could also just kind of pull out the role-playing side of it, drop the price, and make it a Star Wars hotel on its own. There are ways that might happen. Now, I haven't been there, so again, I'm thinking more in terms of if it becomes an issue. So, going into his main point, the Walt Disney Animation Historyland, this kind of fits similar to what I was talking about in terms of Launch Bay and Disney Junior and all of that. Now, again, they have the short with Mickey Mouse, and then they have the main Runaway Railway. And both of those, I think, are really well done. And you can kind of still focus on old school Hollywood, but in a way from the history of the Disney company, which makes sense. It is Disney's Hollywood Studios. So why not look back at we've been going through on Disney Plus and watching a lot of the old shorts. Not all of them are great. Some of the Donald Duck and Pluto ones from like the 40s and 50s, oh boy, they are not my favorites. But in general, the Donald Duck Dark Ride idea, I think is interesting because there are some gems, especially kind of the early times when Donald was just starting to get popular before some of the ones in the 50s were Chip and Dale, where he just spends a lot of time just laughing at everyone. And I'm like, he's so mean. Now, I know part of that is what draws people to Donald. But I like that idea. And I want to make sure to talk about his great moments with Walt Disney. So, I've thought about this for a while. Like, is it considered not allowed because Walt was a real person? So was Abe Lincoln. But again, Abe Lincoln was around much earlier. But is there an issue with doing a Walt animatronic? I know some people would have an issue. But if you really did it well and presented it like you could have him at the opening of Disneyland or talking about Epcot, or I don't know, there might be a way you could do it. Now, I don't know. He doesn't really have speeches in the same way maybe that Lincoln does. We could also have his story about Griffith Park and how Disneyland was started. I mean, there's a lot of audio. You even hear it in One Man's Dream. So maybe there is a way for that to work. Granted, I love the idea of really looking back. I mean, they're so focused on IP at Disney, but if you're looking back at your own history, that's a good thing. There are ways you sell merchandise. You could have new shorts like the Mickey shorts that are happening right now. There's a lot of ways that would benefit. And also this would fit with what I'm talking about with kind of mid-tier level attractions, having these attractions really connect to Disney and also be ones that most people could do. All what I was hoping for. Simpsons, I love Simpsons. I used to watch it every week. Granted, I don't really watch it as much anymore. It's been on for so long, but for a long time, I watched it regularly, and I think they're great. I'm always a little nervous. I mean, it still seems weird to me there's a Spider-Man attraction now in Paris and in California. But I think if there's a way, you could definitely bring in the characters, if nothing else. I don't know if we want to pull in full rides, but I mean, I say this as someone who thinks that the Universal lands for Simpsons are cool. Now, I just don't know with how it would work to have the Simpsons there. And I know they're on Disney Plus and they're owned by Disney and Fox and everything, but having them in the park, I suspect if I saw what they were going to do, that it could be done amazingly well and totally work. And obviously they wouldn't bring in the Back to the Future technology that was used for The Simpsons, but there may be other ways they could do that and make it work out really well. I'm going to hold for now with talking about the Muppets Great Movie Ride because that is going to come up again in another comment. So I'm going to save it for now and talk about that a little bit later when that comes up again because Jeff is not the only person to talk about the Muppets and expanding that and what we might want to do there. So we will revisit that very soon. Before doing that, I want to jump into one of the more ambitious ideas that we've had with Tim Grassi of the Marty Called podcast. He's been on this show a bunch of times. He's always had kind of crazy ideas like moving Small World or moving the Matterhorn was one that he had. So I think this will not be on that level, but it is kind of a big idea. So I hope you enjoy this. Tim's show, Marty Called with Skipper Ben and Josh Fenton, is a very cool show. If you like Armchair Imagineering, this is the type of show that you want to listen to. They also talk about the latest news. Here are Tim's thoughts. Take it away, Tim.
Tim Grassi here of WDWThemeParks.com and the Marty Called podcast. Dan is contractually obligated to have me on the show multiple times per year, but because my lawyer isn't very good, these pre-recorded segments evidently count. So the goal here is to fix Hollywood Studios. I'll be blunt, though. I like the direction they took with this park. It's not perfect, and I certainly miss some of the offerings that are no longer there, but I think that the current version of this park is the best version of this park to date. That being said, there are plenty of areas in Hollywood Studios that still need work, but I'm going to concern myself with a single expansion. I want to build Wakanda from Black Panther in this park. The idea is to extend from the Rock and Roller Coaster courtyard to the animation courtyard. That will all be Wakanda. Quite a bit of the original animation courtyard will have to be removed for this. This includes the current Star Wars launch bay, the Disney Junior stuff, and the defunct Little Mermaid show. I know several of you will be heartbroken for all of that. The land will be set in Wakanda after T'Challa has passed away. I don't like timelines, but legally this may have to happen. I'm operating under the assumption that T'Challa's version of Black Panther cannot be used in Florida without a significant check being written to the Universal overlords. It will be the first Marvel-based theme park land that isn't self-aware that it's in a theme park. If you look at the other Marvel-based lands around the world, they are aware that they exist in the park that they're in. They're somewhat self-referential in that respect, so I thought that a step away from that is in order for Wakanda. And admittedly, though, this is all going to be a tough transition. Going from Sunset Boulevard to this area is going to be tough, and then immediately behind Hollywood Boulevard, you're also going to have a weird transition. I care about sightlines, so this is going to be a little bit weird. There won't be any super tall attractions, especially near the entrances to the land. There will be rock work, and rock work is a good way to blend entrances and have interesting segues from the land. I want to see the Black Panther rock work centered in the stretch of the land. I also want a Warrior Falls facade. So all of that, I think, would allow for a bit of a transition, but really using space to your advantage is the key here. But as I'll tell you when I get into it, the location of some of these attractions will make that a little bit more difficult. So a couple of existing attractions are going to have their infrastructure retained, specifically the Sunset Showcase Theater, which is currently home to the Cars Lightning McQueen Racing Academy show. That will stay, but it'll get an exterior refurb to blend into Wakanda. And then Rock and Roller Coaster itself is going to get a significant retheme. So Sunset Showcase Theater is going to get that exterior facade change, and it'll function as a History of Wakanda or a Wakanda 101 show. I think in the true Galaxy's Edge approach, the land can be done without T'Challa, but if there's a way to legally acknowledge him throughout the land, that would be ideal, and he would absolutely need to be in any sort of History of Wakanda show. The assumption here is that while Black Panther did exceptionally well in the box office, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is very important. We have a theater here. We can showcase some of the history of Wakanda itself and the people. Over at Rock and Roller Coaster, so many people have thought of, all right, what band can we bring in for Rock and Roller Coaster to redo it? Somebody that's a little bit more modern, but that's not really the approach I want to take here. You can use onboard audio for something other than just a musical soundtrack that is tied to an existing band. You can just have a musical score. Any of that has value, and I want Rock and Roller Coaster to get a retheme to the Wakanda Maglev train. The story conceit here is that they've done updates to the train, and I understand it doesn't make a ton of sense that it changes elevation and has inversions, but whatever. If it's a fun retheme, no one really cares. There aren't really elevation changes on Tron either, and nobody's complaining about that. So, if you want to sell the concept of this being a maglev train, you'll need to modify the aesthetic, the lighting at load and unload, and to better hide the track. All of that needs to be done as part of the overhaul, but the track itself will fundamentally remain the same. As a thought of this area, because it's so close to Sunset Boulevard, thought of a way to make the transition work could be building the Hollywood Hills as a facade mountainous structure, and that can transition into the mountains of Wakanda to help kind of blend the areas together. And the entrance for this replacement for Rock and Roller Coaster, that queue can be relocated. You've just kind of got a substantial outdoor queue that doesn't really need to be where it is. You can change the ramp location. You can really relocate the queue structure there if you want to move things further away from Sunset Boulevard. But the gist of this here is we're going to lean into Shuri as a character. She gives you a ton of options. She's an inventor, so she can essentially create ride systems or vehicles or things to be used as concepts for this and other rides. So that leads me into the third attraction. We got the Wakanda 101, the Maglev train, and now the third attraction. This is Shuri's laboratory, and it's going to be an Omni-Mover. She's opened up her lab to show off her technology. I want this to be a high-capacity, family-friendly attraction without a height requirement. It'll be special effects driven with practical effects and screens, but it'll also be a passive experience that everyone in the family can enjoy. Sit down and just enjoy the presentation. And the last thing that I want to do is the e-ticket of the land. It will utilize the simulator tech that is used in Flight of Passage. Similar thing. I'd probably want higher capacity than Flight of Passage or some other means of getting more throughput, whether it's a shorter video or not. But I think just building more theaters is really the way to go here. But it will utilize that ride system, and the conceit will be that we're using the flight simulator that Agent Ross used in the first Black Panther movie. This is something that Shuri controlled remotely, and Shuri has created a new vehicle for us to board that will take us on a tour through Wakanda. I don't expect this to be one of those things go horribly wrong type attractions. I think we should be celebrating Wakanda and not necessarily having a major catastrophe going on. I think so many people wanted to go to Wakanda, much in the same way that so many people wanted to go to Pandora. So those are my ideas for rides. I want to just do that big stretch. It's going to be kind of a horseshoe shaped, more like a sickle shaped, going from the existing Rock and Roller Coaster area to Animation Courtyard. And I'm open to other ideas for Black Panther related attractions. I'd love to hear a good Dora Milaje concept for a ride. Any of that would be welcome here. But in general, I want to see Wakanda built, and I want to see it built in Hollywood Studios.
I like the way that Tim goes all in for a single IP area, but not in a way, oh, there's two attractions, one thrill ride, one other thing, and that's it. Similar to, I guess Galaxy's Edge isn't really a thrill ride and something else, but it's kind of the more expensive one, and then the simulator, and then we have what I was describing as more Pandora. But I do find it interesting that, what Tim described is very ambitious, but I do feel like that's one thing where Disney, especially with Star Wars, I think everything they created, I'm a fan of. Rise of the Resistance, even Smuggler's Run worked. I just feel like they needed more. More meaning more attractions, more entertainment, everything. And I know it's easy to just kind of the laziest theme park type analysis is, well, that's great, but they need more. I understand. But what I like, too, is there's a wide range of attractions. One, he's making good use of Rock and Roller Coaster, like I talked about. I feel like retheming that to something entirely different is the way to go. I like he's also using Lightning McQueen. So both of those attractions, which are near each other, can be part of a new land, rather than it being like, well, here's Rock and Roll, and then here's Pixar, and those don't really fit, and then here's Tower of Terror, which it sounds like is going to stay in place. I don't believe he's doing anything there. But essentially is going to take those two and then add additional attractions. And using the Flight of Passage type technology is interesting because, again, you have the history show, which people can do, and then others that people can do. And then you have, obviously, Rock and Roller Coaster has a limit to how many people are going to do that. And then you have another attraction that most people can do with the technology people really enjoyed. And like Tim mentioned, this is another case where the land looks so cool that people want to experience it. And one way to do that in a way that there's no way they can build Wakanda to the scale like with Pandora, which looks amazing. But Flight of Passage is going to take you to Pandora in a different way. You can build the water and all that, and then everyone jumping around and all that. So while granted, if you're going to do kind of what Disney has done recently and really follow the model that Universal set up with Harry Potter with the two lands and continue to create lands that are focused on a particular IP, I do think Wakanda is a great choice. Now, and so then you look at the park in general, and you have Toy Story Land, which could be expanded, but currently has 3 attractions. Then you have the 2 attractions at Galaxy's Edge. That could also be expanded. I'm just thinking in terms of other ideas. You have Mickey and Minnie's and Tower of Terror as kind of their own things, but then you're using it. Also, another thing I like is the way that Tim talked about expanding it, where you're not hitting a dead end there, where you're essentially connecting it back to where the animation courtyard is and all that area in the back, which is something I also wanted to do. So the big question on whether or not, obviously there are the universal contractual questions, but the other big question there is really, what do we want to see with this park? I know a lot of people's comments have kind of been more focusing back, well, this is a movie park. Let's kind of circle back to the idea of the movies. Whereas Tim pointed out that this current version is what he thinks the best version of the park. So if you build on that and create something even more impressive, that is what he's really trying to do here. And I think Wakanda is a great move. I think it fits better here than at the Animal Kingdom or even at Epcot, where they talked about possibly doing. After seeing the trailer, though, from Wakanda Forever, which looks incredible, I'm looking at it going, this is a property and this is a story and everything that I think could really have legs for Disney, even beyond some of the other elements of the MCU. Feel more classic, and it's something that really could work at Hollywood Studios. So if you're going to go all in with the IP lands and want to really transform that park and really move beyond the studios already, but move it to the next level, this I think is a really cool way to do it. There's still more to cover, if you can believe it. So let's switch gears to another message. This is from Brett Nachman of Notably Disney Podcast. I was recently on his show where we talked about a bunch of cool debates about Disney music. He does a great job, has a lot of interviews. If you enjoy this show, I think it would be right up your alley. He talks to a lot of people associated with Disney's films, parks, and especially the music. Here are Brett's ideas. When I think about Disney's Hollywood Studios in its current iteration, I'm thrilled that headliners like Tower of Terror and Toy Story Mania still pull in crowds, in concert with technologically advanced attractions like Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway and Rise of the Resistance, representing some of the finest in recent memory. But there's part of me that longs for the Hollywood Studios of yonder, circa 2001 roughly, when we had great live shows like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, A Musical Adventure, and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It, along with staples from the earliest days like The Backlot Tour and The Great Movie Ride. The filmmaking concept and live studio production capabilities have long been abandoned, but I still think there's an opportunity for the park to revisit these central aspects that accounted for its foundation. Since Disney is leaning to its IP, I would consider they revisit the scrapped Muppet movie ride concept and build such an attraction behind Muppet Vision 3D. There's the room for it if they extended the boundaries for a park slightly and or replace Mama Melrose. Let's make this area once again a Muppets courtyard. He used an exclamation point there. There's never too much Muppets, and as is, we need some original content. I'm also disappointed with the demise of Animation Courtyard and would see value in bringing back an updated version of the magic of Disney animation. It could feature activities that focus on making a modern Disney animated film, complete with interactive studios that immerse guests in creating a song or score, an exhibit focused on the storyboarding process, and even a theater that would alternate between hosting guest speakers from Walt Disney Animation Studios and a film on the evolution of animation across various forms, such as hand-drawn computers and stop motion. Finally, let's find a way to elevate the live entertainment game. I understand Shanghai Disneyland features a Pirates of the Caribbean stunt show based on the films. It'll be wonderful to see that translated to the park. Where to put it? As much as I love Beauty and the Beast live on stage, it has existed there for 30 years with a few adjustments, and the space could benefit from a new stage production. That said, the whole area would need to be reconfigured and expanded to accommodate a stunt show for pirates, which, needless to say, would have to be epic in scale. Otherwise, if there was some way to accommodate a pirate show in the same space as Fantasmic, with pirates playing during the daytime, that would be fantastic. Then again, there may be structural and resource-based limitations to making that a reality. Thanks for the chance to lend a few ideas, Dan. Look forward to hearing others' thoughts, too. Lots to cover here from Brett. I like these ideas a lot. Let's start with the Great Muppet Movie Ride. And this is something that was brought up earlier. And, reading Brian J. Jones' biography of Jim Henson, which I would highly recommend if you're interested at all in the Muppets or Jim Henson, talks about how Jim Henson was very invested, loved Disney, wanted to get so many attractions in there, but unfortunately, because he passed away when they were just getting started, Muppet Vision 3D was the only one that ended up being there really as far as the main attractions they wanted. One of them they were thinking about was the Muppet Movie Ride, which I know still gets brought up as something very cool. I don't have any issues with it. I think that the Muppets make for great theme park attractions. We went to Muppet Vision 3D again on our last trip. Still really enjoyed it. Still makes me laugh. The only thing I wonder about there is that Disney has continually tried to bring the Muppets back through various types of TV shows. We did have the successful movie that Jason Segel was involved with, but the sequel I did not enjoy very much. So it makes me wonder, I'm still not 100% clear, I hate to say this, how much interest overall there is in the Muppets. Now, granted, if Disney put in a really good attraction related to the Muppets that was funny, that made fun of movies, people would love it. Muppet Vision still does very well. So I'm not against doing it. I do think, though, that I just wonder if there's a desire at Disney to go that way. And I know that's not really this exercise at all, because a lot of these things that I said, they would not have a desire to do it. But I'm interested in that. But I love the idea of the Muppets poking fun at various movies and doing it in a way that, I don't know, it could be a super cool attraction. I like his idea about the Magic Disney animation. I always enjoyed that attraction with Robin Williams and Walter Cronkite. And, I was fascinated by the show on Disney Plus about Frozen 2 and just how much went into even the smallest parts of that and the songs and everything else. And it was because it had a bunch of episodes, they were really able to go a lot deeper than in a single documentary. And so I'm not saying you would do it like that, but it did remind me that there is so much that is different now, even from how we might look at animated films 10 years ago, or especially from kind of the era of the original Disney MGM Studios in 1989. So that could be very cool. I would love to see that, because I feel like people are still interested in how these films are made, and if done kind of to the highest level, where it's not like a boring walkthrough, but really feels possibly interactive, or even just gives you a lot of scenes from recent films like Encanto or some of the Pixar films, you could really make it special. Okay, now the last thing I want to talk about that Brett mentioned is a stunt show. I love stunt shows. And you already have the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular, so I guess in theory you could put it there, but I really like his idea of using the Phantasmic Theater, because you have the water and everything, for some type of Pirates of the Caribbean stunt show. I mean, you could put it in Beauty and the Beast. I don't have a problem with that going away. But the idea, I feel like I've talked a lot about how Disney needs to add capacity to this park and give people more things to do. And to use an area that is only used during the evening, at least for shows, and to find ways, maybe you only do it 3 times or something. And then maybe it's all early in the day, like it's like 10, 12, and 2 or something. And then they have enough time to kind of prep it for Phantasmic. But what a great idea about, again, to use an area in the park to connect to what would be a really cool stunt show. And people would love to have that. I mean, a little like it reminds me of the Treasure Island at Las Vegas, but doing it to Disney's level, not like that. But there's a lot of cool things you do with just people swinging back and forth from both. We've seen the popularity still of the Waterworld show that Universal does. So it's a case where, yes, you could say, oh, maybe Pirates of the Caribbean as a film series isn't as popular, but I guarantee that right now the stunt show would be very popular. Very cool ideas, Brett. I like them all, and I hope that Disney does something in this vein for sure. I'm going to do one more message that I'm reading here before closing out with 2 more audio submissions. This is from Lauren Staniszewski, who has been on this show and hopefully will be again. And she's really into Disney music. We also both love the Animal Kingdom Lodge, and she's been on the show to talk about her most recent trip, and I hope to do it soon because she's gone twice, and I want to talk to her about Guardians of the Galaxy, so I'm hoping to have that show come up next month or maybe even later this month. Here's what Lauren had to say. My biggest need for Hollywood Studios is more A through C, maybe D ticket attractions. There needs to be more options for people to help with the attendance concerns / long lines in the park. Another attraction at Galaxy's Edge would be great, but more smaller scale attractions could be used just about everywhere. The park also needs more shade. That Slinky Dog queue is rough. Pun intended. And the park could definitely use some green spaces. Thematically, I'd love to see Guardians move from Epcot over to Disney's Hollywood Studios, potentially add more Marvel to the area, maybe even retheme Rock and Roller Coaster. It desperately needs a refresh, but I know the legal situation is a tricky one. I'm not sure Disney could ever really have a Marvel area in Disney World. Lastly, it's a crime in my mind that Hollywood Studios doesn't have their Streetmosphere back. Citizens of Hollywood, and there are no animations classes there. Those experiences are some of the heart and soul of the park. We need those back to help DHS regain some identity and maybe even lean into the heart and soul a bit more. Well, I totally agree with Lauren about, like I mentioned earlier, the need for A through C, maybe D ticket attractions. That is big. More shade. Man, Toy Story Land. Oh, come on. Gosh, that area. And even Galaxy's Edge. Both of them could use, I mean, it's so warm and it's only getting warmer and sunnier in general. Add some more shade, add some more green spaces, make it a more inviting place. That actually kind of connects to Tim's idea for Wakanda, because I think that would have a lot of trees and be a green space. But cutting back to this, I mean, in theory, I would love to see Guardians at Hollywood Studios over Epcot. I mentioned that before, and I also talked about Rock and Roller Coaster, so I think Lauren and I are on the same page with that. but I know that putting Marvel in could be challenging, though, like we saw with Guardians at Epcot, there are certain characters that will work. But I want to focus on Lauren's last comment, which had to do, I talked about Streetmosphere a bit, but I was focusing more on other entertainment. But there are so many people that love Citizens of Hollywood, love having all those characters walking around. And I know that's not something overall that Disney's been focusing as much in its parks, not just at Hollywood Studios, but in general. But I think this is something that, like I've mentioned before, is a reasonably priced way that you can really sell a difference at Disney. I mean, not that other parks aren't doing it. I was just watching a video today about Legoland in New York, where they had some really fun characters that you could meet. The Statue of Liberty and all these different characters. But in general, just I know Disney has always done a good job with entertainment, like, bands, especially at Epcot, but also just with Hollywood Studios, with having these characters that's almost like an extension of something you'd see like in Improv or at the Adventures Club when it was around or something like that. And I really miss that they don't do more of that. So whether that's Hollywood Boulevard walking in, like Lauren mentions, or, Sunset Boulevard, or I'd love to see it at Galaxy's Edge, Toy Story Land, I feel like there's a lot of ways that you could do that would really expand the park if you're not able to constantly build attractions. And animation classes, she's the first one who's mentioned that. And I know they kind of tried to do that in Animal Kingdom back in Conservation Station, but it did seem like a lot of people really loved in the area that is now Star Wars Launch Bay, that you could go in there and do animation classes there. I never did them, though I did do one when we were at Alani and had a lot of fun with it and created some kind of scary drawings. But I think, again, it's all about what Disney wants to focus on, kind of like with Brett talking about Magic of Disney Animation, and then Lauren here talking about animation classes. These are all things that people really enjoyed at the park. But is Disney looking to go with that? I would enjoy seeing it. I love the connections to Hollywood and to the history of the Disney company. But is Disney just trying to go full on with just lands and attractions that, like, you are living your Star Wars story like that? Or are they trying to kind of give you background about the studio and the parks? That's still a question. I mean, I kind of know the answer about what they're going for, but it doesn't mean that they always are going to stick with the same thing. They could veer off, especially if Chapek ever leaves. Not that it's going to happen anytime soon, but that could be interesting to see what happens there. Next up is an audio submission from Raymond Ramirez. Raymond is both a listener and a member of the Tomorrow Society through Patreon. You can learn more by going to patreon.com/Tomorrow Society. I think he has some really cool ideas about ways to improve the studios. So take it away, Raymond.
Hey Dan, I'm very excited to share my thoughts for how I would improve Hollywood Studios for your podcast. I have a lot of ideas, so I'll try my best not to ramble. While the park could use a couple more headliner attractions, what it really needs are rides to help spread out park crowds. Right off the bat, I would build a red car trolley similar to the one in DCA that would go from the end of Sunset Boulevard and end in Grand Avenue right in front of Baseline Tap House. Next, I would expand Toy Story Land with 2 flat rides, Toy Soldiers Parachute Drop and the RC Racer mini coaster. I'd also add in a playground area with oversized toy objects for kids to run around. The studios has not had a play area since the popular Honey, I Shrunk the Kids area. Over in Galaxy's Edge, I would revive the canceled Bantha Ride attraction. Regarding the park's struggle with cohesive theming, I think Disney could lean more into the real-life studios and production companies that they already have relationships with. The tunnel to Galaxy's Edge is an awesome physical transition from the real Hollywood to the immersive movie realm of Star Wars. I would like to add signage in front of the tunnel directing people to Industrial Light and Magic. Similar with Toy Story Land, have signs leading guests to Pixar Studios. However, I would go one step further by moving the large Pixar Iron Archway closer towards the entrance of Walt Disney Presents. From there, you can extend the Emeryville brick aesthetic all the way from the current Pixar Place meet and greet area to the new archway location, so that it covers up the back of the runway railway show building. This creates a larger footprint to offer additional meet and greets with various Pixar characters throughout the day. In addition, the Muppets courtyard area would get its own iron archway that says Muppet Studios. And to fully make this a realized land, I would revitalize the canceled Great Muppet Movie Ride and build it either behind the Mama Melrose restaurant or in place of Star Tours. I have 2 ideas for expansions in the park. The first would be the land behind Animation Courtyard. I know many people talk about adding an Avengers campus to Hollywood Studios. However, I would go very left field and suggest a Tim Burton Studios expansion, where guests walk through the old Launch Bay building, but come out the other end into The Nightmare Before Christmas. Taking a cue from Mystic Manor, I would create a trackless dark ride around Jack Skellington and the characters from Halloween Town, as well as an outdoor trackless ride, kind of like Luigi's Rollickin' Roadsters, but with dancing ghosts, kind of like Zero. My favorite idea is a re-theme of Rock and Roller Coaster into Oogie Boogie's High Roller Casino Coaster. The coaster in the dark is perfect for recreating the dark light elements seen in Oogie Boogie's lair, while the riders are trying to dodge the spooky casino traps that we see in the film. Having a Halloween Town expansion also allows for some really cool Christmas overlays within the land. My second expansion plot would be behind Indiana Jones' Stunt Show, expanding into the southern parking lot area. Having signs directing people towards Lucasfilm Studios, guests would turn the corner and enter Indiana Jones expansion. Instead of cloning the original EMV Dark Ride from Disneyland, the park could use a water ride of some sort. So my idea would be to take the Pirates ride concept from Shanghai and retheme it to Indiana Jones. Bringing Indiana Jones and Nightmare Before Christmas into Hollywood Studios, while also expanding Muppet Studios, would complement Toy Story Land and Galaxy's Edge in that each land is now representing a different movie genre. Not to mention, you would have Indiana Jones, which featured physical effects and stunts, Star Wars, which ushered in visual effects that had never before been seen on camera. You got Toy Story, which is the first story feature-length computer animated movie, The Muppets, which featured the craft of puppetry, and The Nightmare Before Christmas, which showcases stop-motion animation. I've gone on for long enough, so I'm going to wrap it up with a couple ideas on updating some of the more outdated shows at the park. I think Animation Academy is a great concept, and while it's fun to have an Animal Kingdom, it deserves to be in the studios, and it needs to be in an animation courtyard. So sorry, Voyage of the Little Mermaid, you're out. Beauty and the Beast live on stage has also outlived its welcome. However, when I think of what would fit thematically within Sunset Boulevard and the Golden Age of Hollywood, Fantasia immediately comes to mind. Obviously, an orchestra performing multiple shows a day would be impossible, but I'd love to see a show that was perhaps designed around dancers and performers with scenes from Fantasia and Fantasia 2000 playing in the background. Of all my ideas, I fully admit this is the least likely to happen. Thanks for listening.
Wow, that is a lot of ideas within about 4 minutes from Raymond. Thanks so much for that. It's basically almost retheming much of the entire park and taking what they've already done with Toy Story and Galaxy's Edge to the next level, but in an interesting way. So I will try to cover most of these as quickly as I can, Raymond. The red car trolley, I love the idea of adding additional transportation to the park, and especially it's another way to solve the fact that Sunset Boulevard is a long way from the other end of the park. So I think it's very cool to have something like that in kind of the old school area that ultimately leads to Grand Avenue. The only trick for there is you don't want to use up too much of the pathways. You probably have to make a few tweaks to it. Interesting with Toy Story Land, because if Disney had started out with attractions like the Parachute Drop and RC Racer and not done Slinky Dog, I would have been like, off the shelf kids area. But now they already have Slinky Dog and Alien Swirling Saucers and Toy Story Mania. Adding those plus the play area to me does make some sense, because you're giving more things for kids to do. I mean, sure, there's other things that might be more exciting for me, but this does kind of take the better attractions from some of the other Toy Story lands and put them in this one, and it includes what I always looking for, which is more ride capacity, more things to do, especially for younger guests. The Bantha ride, that is something that comes up a lot still with the third attraction at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. And like I mentioned, I would definitely like to see Disney add another attraction to that. So it's like, if Disney would be willing to do that, I think it's a great idea. Now, obviously, we've heard a lot about it from Jim Hill, and there's articles about it on Park Stop. There's a lot of different places, so it's very easy to find out what Disney was thinking of doing. So I think they definitely need to do more, but the question is, what would they do, and what would they want to focus on? But obviously the Bantha attraction hung in there for a long time, kind of like a people mover ride where you could kind of see the land, slow moving. It's not that far off what I was looking to see, though obviously I wasn't thinking in terms of the Bantha, but that would be super fun to have an attraction like that in the park. The focus on studios, very interesting. Of course, still called Disney's Hollywood Studios, so it makes sense there. But to have the connections where you call it Muppet Studios, again, great Muppet movie ride. I talked about that earlier. like the concept, especially if you're going to lean into Muppet Studios. Tim Burton Studios, very interesting. Another fun update to Rock and Roller Coaster with the Oogie Boogie's High Roller Casino Coaster. Love that idea. I found that Tim Burton in general, I haven't been as into a lot of his more recent films. I didn't love the Dumbo redo, Alice in Wonderland, especially, though I know he didn't direct the sequel. Ugh. But I will say, Nightmare Before Christmas seems like a no-brainer, and they've had so much success with the overlays in California, and then the Oogie Boogie Bash, and a lot like that. And I love the idea, too, of being able to have overlays in the park during holiday seasons. It's really cool. Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones is so interesting because we do have a fifth film that will be coming out, and so much of whether I would think they should do more is going to depend on the success of that. It's going to be like the fourth film. Everybody's going, oh, yeah, it's nice to have him back, but it feels weird. He seems kind of old. We don't really like Shia LaBeouf that much. There's a lot of things to it. So would they, if this one does not fall into the nuke the fridge category, what would they do there? I love that Pirates technology. I think there's a lot they could do there with that, especially if you can make something with Indiana Jones with a boat ride. Like I said on mine, we need more boat rides at Hollywood Studios. This would be a perfect way to do so. Another vote here for an Animation Academy, and I do think that could fit very well in the Little Mermaid area, especially given what else is around there, as that's not that far from Disney Junior and Mickey and Minnie's and everything else there. And then finally, Beauty and the Beast, with Fantasia. Fantasia, very interesting. And like he mentioned, Fantasia 2000, not as beloved, though Fantasia is really something given what they did with the technology at the time. And I admit I am not an expert on Fantasia 2000, so I don't really want to comment too much on that. But I like the out-of-the-box thinking, where what Raymond's doing overall is looking at a lot of Disney properties and, what they've done either in the far past or more recent past, and connecting it to the park. And that's what I would love to see, is for them to expand more and not just kind of zone in on Pixar, Toy Story, and Star Wars. Let's expand and look at all the other cool properties Disney has to offer. It's time for the final submission. This is from Emily McDermott and Courtney Guth of the Book of the Mouse Club. They do an awesome podcast where they talk about Disney books and do interviews. Really cool stuff. They have a lot of excellent ideas, some that we haven't talked about at all. I am excited for you to hear this. Take it away, Courtney and Emily.
Hello, it's Courtney.
And this is Emily
From Book of the Mouse Club podcast. Thank you, Dan, so much for inviting us back to share our thoughts. We greatly enjoyed giving you some ideas for Dinoland, and we're excited to share what we have for Disney's Hollywood Studios. So, Emily, what is your plan?
So, Courtney, I have lots of thoughts. Dan, I hope you enjoy this too. I'm going to pretend that land is not an issue, same as we pretend that money is not an issue. And I want to build a new land, but it's not super new. I want a Toontown. I want to bring Toontown back to Walt Disney World Resort. I've always loved Toontown. I loved it in the Magic Kingdom when it was Toontown Fair. And I was really sad when it closed. And when I recently went to Disneyland, sad that I missed it because it's closed for refurbishment because they're getting Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. But I love overall that there's a place where the classic characters have somewhere to, quote, live in the park. I love the energy that brings and the idea of like these are real characters and they live here. Now, I don't want necessarily Toontown Fair, but you know how much I love Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So I want the Toontown from that film because it works. It's already connected to Hollywood. In the film, Toontown and Who Framed Roger Rabbit is part of Hollywood. It's next to the movie studios, and the animated world is completely juxtaposed to the, quote, real world. So I think this already fits. Hollywood Studios is already set up for this. We have the aesthetic of old Hollywood. We have the 1940s vibe, which that film is based in. And then all we just need now is the tunes. So I'm thinking we take Minnie and Minnie's Runaway Railway. We already go into the animated world of that attraction. So when you exit, though, instead of coming back into the streets of Hollywood or back into the real world, you end up in Toontown. I'm assuming this Toontown kind of will look like what we have in Disney's, where you have Mickey and Minnie's house. They have kind of like a main street, at least from what I've seen in pictures and videos. But I do want this to be a little bit more of the Toontown like we see in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, in the sense that it's not just the Fab Five that live there. It's not just Mickey, Minnie, Donald, Goofy. Any character can live here. The idea is that they are all part of the working Hollywood. They are the actors. They are part of the film. So you could have an interesting modge-podge of characters, I think, meet here. Maybe not live action with animated, that all have to still be animated. But I think that could be really cool if we kind of emulate that part of Hollywood Studios, the idea that we're all stepping into these movies. Well, here are all the actors. They're all here. So I do want that. I want Roger Rabbit to come back, and I want the ties to Who Framed Roger Rabbit to stay where they are, though. I love the billboard that's on around the lake. I love the Roger Rabbit window, like when he goes through the blinds and it's next to Eddie Valiant's office. Those can stay there because that's part of the idea that they are connected to the regular world, the real world. But then we can bring Roger Rabbit back to the parks. Maybe we don't need Cartoon Spin. Maybe we could bring in the attraction that Kevin Rafferty talked about in his book. The name is escaping me, but it's like you're going on an audition. You're a new character in Toontown trying to get into the movies. So we can bring in that trackless ride system. You do encounter Roger Rabbit. So we don't need Cartoon Spin. Or if we are going to get Cartoon Spin, maybe we update it a lot with trackless ride systems and just new technology. But that's what I want. I want a Toontown. I think it fits so perfectly. It can go in that space behind Rock and Roller Coaster even. I'm sorry to Lightning McQueen, but maybe he can make his way somewhere else. Or we just get more land. But that's ultimately what I want. What about you, Court?
I also went the animation route, but a different way. So the area that I would like to primarily focus on is Animation Courtyard. So I didn't go with a new land. I just feel that this area, it's still labeled on the map, but it has definitely lost its identity ever since the magic of Disney animation was replaced by Star Wars Launch Bay. And I feel Star Wars Launch Bay is not really needed anymore because there's a major presence for that brand in Galaxy's Edge. So in addition to Launch Bay, the area currently houses Disney Junior Play and Dance and the theater for The Voyage of the Little Mermaid, but that show has not reopened post-COVID related park closures in 2020. So even though the parks are open, still no word on that theater. So I'm like, let's get some more life into this area. So I suggest that we keep Disney Junior Play and Dance because I recognize its importance for the toddler crowd, that those visitors are often too short for the major attractions in the theme park, most of which do maintain a height requirement. I will say, though, even though it's not officially Disney, the Australian-produced cartoon Bluey is one of the most popular shows in the Disney Junior lineup, so it would be fun if she and the other characters from the show could have a presence there. We are big Bluey fans. I would also like to bring back a new generation of the magic of Disney animation that showcases behind-the-scene elements of animation movie making and houses rotational meet and greets. This would go back essentially where it was in Launch Bay. I would theme the areas around the Walt Disney Animation Studio, the Pixar Studios, and Disney Television Animation. I feel like the latter has a lot of great projects with large fan bases that could be well served by such an attraction. This would be a self-paced walkthrough attraction that would include interactive elements about each studio and their major products, and I envision the experience culminating in a character meet and greet space, and that would rotate to include characters from the latest animation projects. So picturing recently maybe May as the panda from Turning Red, or Mirabelle from Encanto, just to name what would I put there right now. I would suggest turning Voyage of the Little Mermaid into an Animation Academy class. I miss the Learn to Draw class that was previously in the Magic of Disney Animation experience, and Disney has held drawing classes in the America Gardens Theater during Epcot's Festival of the Arts. There's a similar smaller but theater venue for the class at the Disney California Adventure, so I feel like this could easily be done at a similar scale. It would have repeatability for guests with different character drawing lessons offered throughout the day as a nice air-conditioned respite from the Florida weather, and different characters could be offered seasonally to tie in with holidays and major events. Finally, I would actually expand the footprint of the Animation Courtyard to include the location currently occupied by the Brown Derby. I always loved the idea of the Hollywood that never was and always will be that was part of Eisner and the Imagineers' vision for the park, but I feel that it's no longer prevalent or relevant throughout the park in its current state. So I would scrap this restaurant, change it into a new signature dining experience called the Ink and Paint Club. Maybe another little Roger Rabbit nod for you there. But I would change the motif to channel the animator's palette restaurant aboard several of the Disney Cruise Line ships where animation comes to life throughout the course of the meal. So maybe not the Ink and Paint Club from Roger Rabbit necessarily, but drawing on that name to bring new life into the dining in that corner of the park.
You know, if Jessica Rabbit wants to have a nice solo performance there, I don't think anyone would mind. I think that'd be fun. Or Donald Duck can play the piano and sing us some piano tunes.
Very nice. Well, thank you again, Dan, for having us on to share. We can't wait to hear what everyone else has to say.
Thanks so much to Courtney and Emily for having so many cool ideas. And a lot of them are ones we haven't really talked about much so far, so I thought it was a good way to end the show. Let's start with Emily's. The Toontown idea is really interesting to me because I feel like Toontown at Disneyland is so cool. And especially now with Toontown being gone, it wasn't the same, but the version in Florida now being replaced by Storybook Circus as far as New Fantasyland. I know they have character rings there, but it's not the same level as right here. I think it's great, and especially with Runaway Railway at Toontown at Disneyland. Now, you don't want to make it where both coasts are just the same. I like the idea of making this different and having it feel more comfortable in the studios. And a great point that Emily makes is having any character being able to be there because, you know, you don't want to just have it be the same characters. You can bring in characters from recent films, which is something Courtney brings up, which we'll talk about in a minute. Or you can just have, like, even Roger Rabbit is a character where, you know, people are starting to catch up with it more now, but it's a movie that for a while wasn't talked about as much by a lot of people. Now, it's interesting to me where I would actually think, I mean, I know Emily mentioned that we maybe could do Cartoon Spin as Trackless Dark Rider updated, but I like the idea of adding Cartoon Spin and the attraction that Kevin Rafferty spoke about, both of them. Because again, like I've talked about many times, you want to have a lot more attractions. And I look at Cartoon Spin the way it's constituted now, and you could do an updated version, I don't have a problem with that, but something like that as like a C-ticket attraction. So you have that, and then you have another new attraction. So you have two plus the other changes, and you know all the meet and greets and everything else going on in Toontown. Probably wouldn't even mess with bringing in the Gadget Go coaster, but you know there's a lot you could do there. That even at least two attractions, if not three, plus the character meet and greets, which would really be a fun expansion for the area. And I would like to see it, especially if there's more of a focus on history and where it's not just like, this feels way too much like Fantasyland or something, that you're really looking at it in terms of the history, like I talked about too, of the main characters, but also that kind of 1940s vibe. I think it's a really cool idea. Looking at what Courtney had to say with the animation courtyard, I think that a lot of people focusing on that area, totally understandable. Bluey's an interesting idea, where my daughters are a bit older, but still have enjoyed watching Bluey because it's just a lot of fun and very clever. And I think if even just a meet and greet would be awesome, or incorporating that somehow into Disney Junior, though it's a little different vibe from that show, I think would be great. And any cool ways to use the launch bay, I think is a great idea. And having, you know, Little Mermaid becoming Animation Academy, I love that idea. I really wanted to zone in too on the Brown Derby because that hasn't come up at all. And that's one of those kind of that I feel like a lot of people look at as kind of an untouchable restaurant. But if you're really going to move away from, like Disney has done, from the idea of studios or even the original Disney MGM Studios and focus more in, like Courtney's doing with animation, it's an interesting idea with the Ink and Paint Club, you know, kind of like the Animator's Palette. But to have the restaurant, this kind of circles back to what Carly Wiesel was talking about, though she hadn't focused on the Brown Derby. But to have a restaurant that fits within this new land, and, you know, most people don't know what the Brown Derby was or is. I didn't know. My parents knew of it, but I didn't know about it when I was a kid. But, you know, great restaurant. I'm not saying that I feel like it has to be replaced, and I know a lot of people love it. But if you are really trying to kind of think in terms of the new Hollywood Studios park, it's an interesting idea to really zone in even on areas like that and figure out, does this fit with what we're doing right now? I like that idea, especially because it's one we haven't heard about before. Thanks so much, Courtney and Emily. These are all awesome ideas. I think I could do an hour just on some of these. But this has been a pretty long show, so I want to say thank you to all the submissions from past guests, from listeners. It's a great mix, and I feel like we did a very good job summarizing ways we could improve Disney's Hollywood Studios. I'd love to hear what you think of the show. Shoot me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. You can always follow me on Twitter, Tomorrow SOC, Facebook, Instagram, Tomorrow Society. Check out the YouTube channel for Tomorrow Society Podcast, where I'm posting some fun videos from our last trip and have some old home movies, plus all the podcast episodes. If you'd like to find a way to support the show, like I mentioned earlier, go to patreon.com/Tomorrow Society. You can really help out with a monthly contribution and also get access to some very cool perks. Don't forget to leave ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the usual places. Always love to receive those. And check out all my older shows, tomorrowsociety.com/podcast with an S at the end. Thank you so much for listening. This was a lot of fun to put together. I hope you're all doing okay out there as we roll through a brutally hot summer, at least in St. Louis, and with very weird weather. Hope you're hanging in there, having a good summer, able to have a lot of fun as we roll into the beginning of the school year, crazily enough. Really appreciate all the support, and I will talk to you again next time.